Under the merciless Arizona sun, Thomas Mercy rode the dusty trail that wound between towering saguaro cacti and red rock formations, standing like silent sentinels against the endless sky. His bay horse stepped carefully over the cracked earth, each hoof fall lifting small clouds of dust that vanished in the dry, scorching air. Thomas adjusted his wide-brimmed hat, shielding his weathered face from the sun's brutal glare dancing off distant mesas. 3 days he had been tracking. 3 days since he found his ranch reduced to ash and bone, cattle scattered across the pasture like broken toys, and his wife Martha buried beneath the rubble of the home he had built with his own hands. The neighbors spoke of Mexican bandits. Others blamed the Apache, but Thomas knew the truth. He recognized the calling card left by Silas Kane's men, the same man who controlled half the territory with an iron fist and a heart carved from desert stone. The trail led north toward the jagged mountains where Kane kept his stronghold. Thomas checked his Colt revolver for the 10th time that morning. 6 bullets. It would have to be enough if his aim held true, as it had for all 42 years of his hard-lived life. The wind carried the scent of sage and something else, something that made the hair on his neck stand like wire. Smoke. Not the clean smoke of a campfire, but the thick, acrid smell of burning wood and worse things. Thomas urged his horse forward, following a narrow canyon that cut deep into the mountainside like a wound in the earth itself. As he rounded a bend, the canyon opened into a small valley, and what he saw made him rein his horse to a halt. A cabin sat in the valley's center, its roof partially collapsed, smoke still rising from the charred timbers. But it was not the burned building that caught his attention. It was the figure sitting motionless beside a small creek that ran through the valley floor. A woman sat with her back to him, long dark hair falling like a curtain around her shoulders. She wore a torn dress that might once have been blue, now stained with soot and blood. Her hands rested in her lap, and she stared at the water flowing past her bare feet, with the stillness of someone who had forgotten how to move. Thomas dismounted slowly, his boots crunching on gravel. The woman did not turn. He approached with the caution of a man who had learned that stillness often meant danger in this unforgiving land. "Ma'am," he called softly. She did not respond. As he drew closer, he could see the tremor in her shoulders, the way her fingers clutched at the fabric of her dress. She was young, maybe 25, with skin bronzed by sun and wind. Blood had dried on her temple, and her dress was torn at the shoulder. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" This time she turned, and Thomas saw eyes the color of winter sky, pale blue and filled with something between terror and emptiness. She looked at him as if he were a ghost, or perhaps as if she were one herself. "They killed him," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the creek's gentle murmur. Thomas knelt beside her, keeping his distance but close enough to offer comfort. "Who did this?" "My husband. They burned everything. Said we owed money to Mr. Kane." Her voice broke on the name, and Thomas felt his jaw tighten. Samuel tried to fight them, but there were too many. The pieces fell into place like dominoes. Kane's men had been busy, collecting debts with fire and lead. Thomas had not been their only target, just the most recent. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Sarah Wheeler." She looked at him with those haunted eyes. "Are you here to finish what they started?" "No, ma'am. I'm here because they did the same to me." Thomas removed his hat, running a hand through his graying hair. "My name is Thomas Mercy. I was tracking the men who killed my wife." Sarah's expression shifted slightly, recognition flickering in her gaze. "You're the one they talked about, the gunfighter from Tombstone." Thomas nodded slowly. His reputation had followed him, even to this remote corner of the territory. "I was. Now I'm just a man with nothing left to lose." Sarah studied his face, searching for something. "What do you plan to do?" "I plan to make Silas Kane answer for what he's done." Thomas stood, extending his hand to her. "But first, I need to get you somewhere safe." She looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment, then took it. Her fingers were cold despite the desert heat, and he could feel the trembling that ran through her like water over stones. "There is nowhere safe," she said quietly. "Not while Kane controls this territory." "Then maybe it's time someone challenged that control." Sarah allowed him to help her to her feet. She was smaller than she had appeared sitting by the creek, barely reaching his shoulder. But there was something in the way she held herself, a strength that had not been broken despite everything she had endured. Thomas led her to his horse, offering her the canteen from his saddlebag. She drank deeply, water running down her chin and neck, washing away some of the dust and blood. When she finished, she looked at him with clearer eyes. "Kane has 20 men, maybe more. His ranch is like a fortress up in the mountains. You cannot take him alone." "I don't plan to take him. I plan to kill him." The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Sarah searched his face, and whatever she saw there made her nod slowly. "Then you will need help. I know his routines, his habits. I know where he goes when he thinks no one is watching." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "You know Kane personally?" "He came to our ranch 3 months ago. Said he was buying up land for a railroad company. Offered Samuel a fair price, but Samuel refused. Said the land had been in his family for 2 generations. Sarah's voice hardened. Kane said he would get the land one way or another. He was not lying. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Thomas knew they needed to find shelter before nightfall. The desert could be treacherous in darkness, and Kane's men might still be in the area. "There's an old line shack about 5 miles east of here," Thomas said. "We can rest there tonight. Plan our next move." Sarah nodded, but as they prepared to leave, she turned back toward the burned cabin. "I should bury him. Samuel deserves better than being left for the coyotes." Thomas followed her gaze to where a man's body lay near the cabin's front door, partially hidden by fallen timbers. "We'll come back. I promise you that. But right now, we need to stay alive long enough to make this right." They rode through the gathering dusk, Sarah seated behind Thomas on the bay horse. She held onto his belt with hands that gradually stopped shaking as they put distance between themselves and the ruins of her former life. The old line shack appeared as full darkness settled over the desert, a small wooden structure that had once served cowboys working the range. Thomas helped Sarah down from the horse, then set about making camp. He found enough dry wood to build a small fire, careful to keep it low and shielded from view. Sarah sat on a log beside the fire, staring into the flames with the same hollow expression he had seen by the creek. "Tell me about Kane," Thomas said as he prepared a simple meal from his supplies. "What kind of man are we dealing with?" Sarah accepted the plate of beans and hardtack he offered. "He's smart, ruthless. He came to the territory 5 years ago with money and connections back east. Started buying up land, making deals with the railroad companies. Anyone who wouldn't sell..." She gestured vaguely toward the darkness where her burned home lay. "He ever do his own killing?" "No. He has men for that. But he watches. He enjoys seeing people break." Sarah's voice carried a bitter edge. "He offered to buy me along with the land. Said a woman like me should not be wasted on a dirt farmer." Thomas felt anger coil in his chest like a snake. "What did your husband say to that?" "Samuel put a shotgun in his face and told him to get off our property. Kane just smiled and said he would be back." Sarah set down her plate, appetite gone. He kept his word. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Finally, Sarah spoke again. "Why did you leave Tombstone? A man with your reputation could have made a good living there." Thomas poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. "Got tired of killing. Thought I could find peace out here with Martha. Build something instead of tearing it down. And now? Now I remember why I was good at what I did." Thomas looked at her across the flames. "Sometimes a man has to become what he hates to protect what he loves." Sarah nodded slowly. "My father used to say that every gun has 2 stories. The one that saves and the one that destroys. Sometimes they're the same story. Your father was a wise man. He was a sheriff. Killed in the line of duty when I was 16. Sarah's voice softened. "That's how I met Samuel. He was one of the men who brought my father's killer to justice." Thomas understood. Loss had shaped them both, carved them into people who knew the value of life and the cost of justice. In the morning, they would begin the hunt for Silas Kane. But tonight, they shared the comfortable silence of 2 souls who had found each other in their darkest hour. As the fire burned low, Thomas offered Sarah his bedroll. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." "What about you?" "I'll keep watch. Old habits." Sarah hesitated, then moved closer to where he sat. "I don't want to be alone tonight, not after everything." Thomas understood. He had felt the same crushing loneliness after Martha's death, the way silence could become a weight that threatened to crush the spirit. He spread the bedroll large enough for both of them, maintaining respectful distance while offering the comfort of human presence. As Sarah settled beside him, she spoke quietly. "Do you think we can really do this? Stop Kane." Thomas stared up at the stars, scattered across the desert sky like diamonds on black velvet. "I think we're going to try. And sometimes trying is enough." The next morning brought news that changed everything. As they prepared to leave the line shack, Thomas spotted a rider approaching from the east. He drew his gun, motioning for Sarah to take cover behind the cabin. But as the rider drew closer, Thomas recognized the star pinned to his vest. Sheriff Bill Dawson reined in his horse 20 feet away, hands visible and empty. "Easy there, Tom. I'm not here for trouble." Thomas kept his gun drawn but lowered it slightly. He had known Dawson for years, a good man trying to keep the peace in a lawless territory. "What brings you out here, Bill?" "Looking for you, actually. Heard about what happened to your place. Sorry about Martha." "Thank you." Thomas holstered his weapon. "I suppose you're here to talk me out of going after Kane." Dawson dismounted, approaching slowly. "Actually, I'm here to help. Kane's been a problem for a long time, but I never had enough evidence to move against him. What he did to you and the Wheelers, that was sloppy. Left witnesses." Sarah emerged from behind the cabin, and Dawson touched his hat brim respectfully. "Ma'am, glad to see you're alive." "Sheriff," she acknowledged. "Are you really here to help, or are you here to arrest us?" "Help," Dawson said firmly. "Kane's gotten too bold, too careless. He's been paying off territorial officials, but he can't buy them all. There's a federal marshal coming through next week. If we can get enough evidence..." "Evidence won't bring back Martha or Samuel," Thomas interrupted. "Won't bring back all the others Kane has killed. No, but it might prevent more killing. Legal justice, Tom, the kind that sticks." Thomas considered this. He had been prepared to die in his quest for vengeance, but the possibility of stopping Kane permanently, of ensuring no other families suffered as his had, was appealing. "What did you have in mind?" he asked. "Kane's holding a big meeting tomorrow night. All his men, plus some investors from back east. They're planning to expand operations, buy up more land. If we could get someone inside..." "I know the ranch," Sarah said quietly. "I could get in." "Absolutely not," Thomas said immediately. "Too dangerous." "It's the only way," Sarah insisted. "Kane's men know both of you. They don't know I'm alive. They'll think I'm just another woman looking for work." Dawson nodded slowly. "She's right, but we would need backup, a way to get her out if things go wrong." "I have some ideas about that," Thomas said grimly. They spent the rest of the day planning. Sarah would approach Kane's ranch at sunset, claiming to be a widow looking for work. She would gather information about the meeting, then signal Thomas and Dawson when the time was right. It was dangerous, but it was their best chance to end Kane's reign of terror. As evening approached, Thomas found himself alone with Sarah behind the line shack. She was checking the small derringer he had given her, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what lay ahead. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "Yes, I do." She looked up at him, and he saw something new in her eyes. Not the emptiness he had found by the creek, but determination. Samuel was a good man. He deserved better than what Kane gave him. So did your Martha. Thomas reached out, touching her cheek gently. When this is over, we'll see what's left of us," Sarah finished. "For now, that's enough." She kissed him then, brief but fierce, a promise and a farewell combined. Then she was gone, riding toward Kane's fortress in the mountains, carrying with her the hopes of justice and the weight of their shared loss. Thomas and Sheriff Dawson took positions on the ridge overlooking Kane's ranch, waiting for Sarah's signal. The sprawling complex below looked like a small town, with a main house, several outbuildings, and a bunkhouse that could hold 30 men. Lanterns flickered in windows, and smoke rose from multiple chimneys. "Quite an operation," Dawson observed. "Built on blood and fear," Thomas replied, checking his rifle. "Time to tear it down." As if summoned by his words, a light appeared in the window of the main house. 3 flashes, then darkness. Sarah's signal. "That's it," Thomas said. "Kane's in his study. The meeting must be starting." They made their way down the ridge, moving through shadows cast by the full moon. The ranch was well guarded, but Thomas had learned patience in his years as a gunfighter. He knew how to move unseen, how to strike without warning. The first guard never saw them coming. Dawson's badge got them close enough for Thomas to strike with the butt of his rifle. The man dropped silently, and they dragged him into the shadows of the barn. 2 more guards patrolled the main house. Thomas took the one on the left, Dawson the right. They moved simultaneously, years of experience guiding their actions. Within minutes, they were inside the house, following the sound of voices toward Kane's study. Through the slightly open door, they could see Kane holding court with 5 well-dressed men around a large oak table. Maps covered the surface, showing land parcels throughout the territory. Sarah stood in the corner, pouring whiskey for the men, playing her role perfectly. "Gentlemen," Kane was saying, "by this time next year we'll control every water source from here to the Colorado River. The railroad will have no choice but to pay our prices." "And the current landowners?" one of the investors asked. Kane smiled coldly. "We'll be convinced to sell one way or another. We've had great success with our persuasion techniques." Thomas felt his finger tighten on the trigger. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the chance to end Kane's reign of terror with a single shot. But Dawson's hand on his arm reminded him of their agreement. They needed Kane alive, needed his confession. "Silas Kane," Dawson announced, pushing through the door with his badge visible. "You're under arrest for murder, arson, and conspiracy." The room erupted in chaos. Kane's men reached for their guns, but Thomas was faster. His first shot took down the gunman nearest to Sarah. His second dropped the man reaching for Kane. The investors dove for cover, screaming in terror. Kane himself remained calm, his hand moving slowly toward the drawer of his desk. "Sheriff Dawson, and the famous Thomas Mercy. I wondered when you'd show up." "Keep your hands where I can see them," Thomas ordered, his rifle trained on Kane's chest. "Or what? You'll shoot me in cold blood? I thought you were a man of honor." "Honor died with my wife," Thomas replied, "along with Samuel Wheeler and all the others you've killed." Kane's smile widened. "Prove it." "You have no evidence, no witnesses except a hysterical widow and a has-been gunfighter." "We have enough," Dawson said, producing a set of shackles, "including testimony from some of your own men who've decided to cooperate." For the first time, Kane's composure cracked. "Impossible. My men are loyal." "Loyalty bought with fear doesn't last," Sarah said quietly from the corner. "Some of them are tired of being afraid." Kane's eyes fixed on her, and Thomas saw recognition dawn in his face. "You're supposed to be dead." "Another one of your failures," Sarah replied. Kane lunged for his desk drawer, but Thomas was ready. His shot took Kane in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing into the wall. The would-be cattle baron collapsed, blood spreading across his white shirt. "That's for Martha," Thomas said quietly, "and for Samuel, and for all the others." Kane clutched his wounded shoulder, his face pale with shock and pain. "You can't prove anything." "I have connections, friends in high places." "Had," Dawson corrected, kneeling beside the wounded man. "Turns out your friends don't much like being associated with murderers. The territorial governor is very interested in cleaning up this mess." As Dawson placed Kane under arrest, Thomas found himself standing beside Sarah. The immediate danger was over, but both of them knew the real work was just beginning. Kane's empire would need to be dismantled, his victims compensated, and his men dealt with according to law. "It's over," Sarah said softly. Thomas nodded, but he knew it wasn't really over. It would never be over. Not completely. Martha and Samuel would never come back, and the scars left by Kane's reign of terror would take years to heal. But for the first time since he had found his ranch in ashes, Thomas felt something other than anger and despair. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. Thomas looked at her, this woman who had shown such courage in the face of unimaginable loss. "Now we rebuild, not just the buildings but the lives, the community. Together, if you'll have me." Sarah smiled for the first time since he had found her by the creek. "I think I'd like that." Outside, the sun was beginning to rise over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The long night was over, and though the road ahead would be difficult, they would walk it together. Justice had been served, but more importantly, hope had been restored. As they rode away from Kane's ranch, Thomas reflected on the words Sarah's father had spoken years ago. Every gun had two stories, the one that saves and the one that destroys. Sometimes they were the same story, but in the end, it was the choice of which story to tell that mattered. Thomas Mercy had told his story. Now it was time to write a new one. The weeks that followed brought changes to the territory that no one could have predicted. With Kane's arrest and the exposure of his criminal enterprise, federal authorities moved quickly to restore order. The railroad company, embarrassed by their association with Kane's methods, offered fair compensation to the families affected by his reign of terror. Thomas used his portion of the settlement to rebuild his ranch, but this time he did not work alone. Sarah proved to be a capable partner, her knowledge of farming and ranching complementing his own skills. Together, they created something neither could have achieved alone. The new ranch was different from the old one. Where Thomas's first home had been built for solitude, this one was designed for community. There was a large common room where neighbors could gather, guest quarters for travelers, and a schoolhouse where Sarah taught the children of the growing settlement. As spring turned to summer, Thomas found himself thinking less about the past and more about the future. Sarah's laughter filled the spaces that had once echoed with loneliness. Her touch had healed wounds that he had thought would never mend. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Sarah spoke the words that had been in both their hearts for months. "I love you, Thomas Mercy." He turned to look at her, this woman who had saved him as surely as he had saved her. "And I love you, Sarah Wheeler, more than I thought possible." They were married on a crisp autumn morning, with Sheriff Dawson performing the ceremony and half the territory in attendance. It was a celebration not just of their union, but of the community's survival and renewal. As Thomas slipped the ring onto Sarah's finger, he thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had begun with loss and vengeance, but it had ended with love and hope. The desert had not beaten them. Instead, it had taught them that, even in the harshest conditions, life could find a way to flourish. The ranch prospered, becoming a gathering place for those seeking a fresh start in the territory. Thomas's reputation as a gunfighter gave way to a new identity as a community leader and Sarah's husband. He still carried his Colt, but now it was a tool of protection rather than vengeance. On quiet evenings, when the work was done and the children were asleep, Thomas and Sarah would sit by the fire and plan for the future. They spoke of the school they would build, the families they would help settle, and the children they hoped to raise in this place they had carved from the wilderness. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked one night. "Giving up the life you had before?" Thomas considered the question seriously. "I regret the circumstances that brought us together. I regret the pain we both had to endure. But I don't regret the choice we made to build something new from the ashes of the old." Sarah nodded, understanding. "I sometimes wonder what Samuel would think of all this, whether he would approve." "He would want you to be happy," Thomas said with certainty. "Just as Martha would want the same for me. The dead don't hold grudges. Only the living do that." As winter approached, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. The news filled Thomas with a joy he had not experienced since his youth. This child would be born into a world very different from the one that had shaped its parents, a world where justice was possible and love could triumph over hatred. Thomas spent the winter months preparing for fatherhood, reading books Sarah had ordered from back east and talking to the other fathers in the community. He built a cradle from oak and carved toys from scraps of pine. Every stroke of the knife was an act of love, a promise to the child who would soon join their family. When spring arrived, so did their daughter. Thomas held her for the first time as dawn broke over the desert. Her tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb with surprising strength. They named her Martha Sarah, honoring both the woman who had been lost and the woman who had been found. As Thomas looked down at his daughter's face, he saw the future of the territory they had helped to build. This child would grow up knowing that justice was possible, that love could conquer hatred, and that even the most broken lives could be mended with patience and faith. The desert wind whispered through the windows of their home, carrying with it the scent of sage and the promise of rain. Thomas Mercy, once a gunfighter seeking vengeance, now a father holding his daughter, smiled as he looked toward the horizon where the sun was rising on a new day. In the end, the story had not been about the gun at all. It had been about the choice to put it down, to choose love over hatred, hope over despair. And in that choice, Thomas and Sarah had found not just justice, but redemption. The last shot had been fired, but the story was just beginning.